Midnight fell hard across Elmswood, the kind of black that devoured candlelight and made even the bravest souls tighten their grip on their rifles. The wind howled through the empty street like it was warning the living to stay inside, but they didn't listen. Not tonight. The town had gathered on the outskirts, where the church shadow gave way to dust and sagebrush, and where justice, if you could call it that, was about to be served under the light of a blood-red moon. They called her Witch Girl. No name. No age. Just a ragged thing of bare feet and tangled hair, bound to a wooden post like an offering to something older than God. Her arms were stretched tight, wrists raw where the ropes bit in, but her face, it didn't break. There was no crying, no pleading. Just those cold, silent eyes that stared back at every spitting, jeering soul with a kind of quiet knowing. A boy threw the first stone. It bounced off her collarbone with a dull thunk. She didn't flinch. A woman hissed and crossed herself, muttering about how the preacher warned them this would happen, that the devil comes in many forms and not all wear horns. Sheriff Mallory stood off to the side, sweat bleeding down his temples, though the night was cold. His badge caught the firelight in a sickly flash, but he didn't speak. Hadn't spoken much since the preacher arrived 3 weeks ago with fire in his belly and a Bible thick as a brick. The sheriff wasn't a bad man. Just tired. Tired of fighting ghosts he didn't believe in, tired of folks looking at him like they wanted a gallows, not a lawman. The preacher stood at the center of the crowd, one hand clutching his silver cross and the other raised high like Moses splitting the sea. "The Lord is clear," he thundered, his voice cracking the hush like thunder off canyon walls. "Suffer not the witch to live." And the crowd answered him. Not with words but with hate. With torches and dirt, and the kind of fear that turns neighbors into executioners. Sable, though none knew that name, kept her mouth shut. She always had. From the day she staggered into Elmswood, clothes scorched and hands blistered, to the day old man Becker's barn caught fire after she passed by, she hadn't spoken a word. That silence unnerved them more than screams ever could. Someone lit a torch. The flames danced, wild and gold and hungry. The mob stepped back as it passed, a sacred thing now, carrying the weight of sin and salvation. The torchbearer, a miner with whiskey on his breath and anger in his bones, stared up at her with a half-apologetic shrug. Like he didn't want to do it, not really. But she had to be something unnatural. Right? The torch drew closer. That's when the sound of hooves broke the chant. It came low at first like a storm on the edge of the world. Then louder, faster, slicing through the desert stillness like a blade. Every head turned. Even the preacher paused, hands still high. A horse galloped out of the darkness, its coat streaked with dust, its rider a silhouette against the moon. He rode straight for them, not slowing. Not hesitating. The crowd parted instinctively as the rider approached, the torch guttering in the sudden gust of his arrival. The horse skidded to a halt, hooves grinding stone. The man dismounted slow, boots hitting the ground with the heavy weight of someone who wasn't there to ask permission. He looked young, maybe 30. Hard to tell under the dust. His coat was long and worn, the kind you didn't buy new, and his hat shadowed his eyes until he looked up. Then the firelight caught them, sharp, cold blue. Nobody spoke. The stranger walked straight toward her, every step deliberate. He didn't draw a weapon, didn't bark a threat. He just walked right past the torchbearer, past the preacher's stunned face, and stood before the girl. She looked at him then. Her eyes met his for the first time, and something in them cracked. Not fear, not even hope, but surprise. He reached up, almost gentle, and placed a gloved hand on the rope at her wrist. "Untie her," he said, voice flat as desert stone. "She's mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman dropped her Bible. "Who the hell are you?" the preacher barked. The man didn't look away from the girl. "Name's Colt Ashburn." "She's cursed," someone muttered behind him. Colt turned slowly. His eyes swept the crowd, each face shrinking beneath that cold, soldier's stare. "No," he said. "She's hunted. There's a difference." The preacher tried to regain control, stepping forward, jabbing a finger at the bound girl. "That thing brought ruin to this town. Fire, disease, madness." Colt stepped between them. "You ever consider that maybe ruin was already here, and she just walked into it?" "Blasphemy," the preacher hissed. Colt ignored him. He pulled a knife from his belt, not quick, not slow. Just sure. Then he turned back to her, sable, and cut the rope. Her arms fell limp, and he caught her before she hit the ground. The touch jolted something in her, she gasped. Her first sound all night. She blinked up at him. "Why?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Just lifted her onto his horse like she weighed nothing. Then he swung up behind her, turned the beast around, and rode off the same way he'd come. The crowd stood stunned. No one moved. Not even the preacher. It wasn't until the sound of hooves had vanished into the dark that Sheriff Mallory finally spoke. "You gonna send men after him?" The preacher's lip curled. "No," he said too soft. "The desert'll take care of them." Far beyond the edge of Elmswood, Colt rode on. Sable leaned against him, weak but awake, her head tucked under his chin. He said nothing. Just held the reins loose and steady. "I don't belong to anyone," she murmured. "I know," he replied. "But saying you're mine was the only thing they'd listen to." She looked up. "You believe them? About the curse?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "No." Pause. "But I believe you've seen hell. And survived it." The stars blinked above them like distant fires. The cold bit deep, but neither of them flinched. For the first time in a long while, Sable didn't feel like prey. She didn't feel powerful either. Just alive. Colt shifted in the saddle. "We'll stop soon. Find a place to rest." "I don't sleep much," she said. He gave a dry chuckle. "Neither do I." Behind them, Elmswood disappeared into the dark. The torchlight faded. The mob went home. And somewhere in the silence between stars, the wind carried a different name across the plains, one not whispered in fear but in warning. Sable was free. But something had changed. And the desert was listening. The desert stretched out like a sleeping beast, endless and unknowable, breathing wind and silence between every mile. Colt Ashburn rode through it with the girl slumped against his chest, her body limp but still breathing. The night was cooling fast, stars glinting like shattered glass above them, and the distant outline of the San Marcos Ridge cut jagged lines across the sky. He didn't speak. Words, he'd learned, didn't do much good when a person was hurting this bad. She hadn't said anything since they left Elmswood. Just stared into the dark like she was waiting for it to swallow her whole. Colt felt the weight of her, small, bruised, but tense beneath the surface, like a coil wound too tight for its own good. Every time the horse jolted over a stone, she winced but never complained. They rode for another hour before Colt found what he was looking for, an outcropping of red rock, shaped like a crooked horseshoe, that curved inward to break the wind. He dismounted first, then lifted her down. She stumbled but didn't fall. "I can walk," she murmured. "Didn't say you couldn't," he replied. He tied the horse and unpacked a small bedroll and a battered tin can of beans. The girl stood near the rock wall, arms crossed, back straight, watching him like a coyote might watch a campfire, drawn to it but wary. He lit a fire with practiced hands. No matches. Just flint and steel. The sparks flared then caught. She stepped closer inch by inch. "What's your name?" he asked, not looking at her. She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Sable." Colt nodded. "Didn't figure you were called witch girl at birth." Sable sat, arms hugging her knees. Her face, smeared with ash and dried blood, caught the flicker of firelight in a way that made her look almost otherworldly. "Why did you do it?" "You looked like someone who hadn't heard a kind word in too long." "That's not a reason." "It is to me." Sable went quiet. The flames cracked between them. Colt stirred the beans, handed her the first bite. She hesitated, then ate. One slow bite after another, like she was tasting food for the first time in days. He studied her face. Not in the way most men stared at women, but like someone trying to read a story written in scars. Her cheek was swollen. Her left eye bore the ghost of a bruise. And the wrists, the skin there was torn raw where the ropes had held her. "You ever been in a town like Elmswood before?" he asked. She chewed, swallowed, shook her head. "They all feel the same." "They always tie you up?" "No. Some just chase me out with rocks. Others shut their doors." He nodded slowly, jaw working. "And you? You ever do the things they say you did?" Sable looked him in the eye. "No. Good enough." She blinked, startled by the simplicity of it. The silence stretched, but it was different now. Softer. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the kind that wrapped itself around two people too tired to talk. Eventually she said, "They'll come after you for this." "I know." "You're not afraid?" He shrugged. "Fear's a companion. Doesn't mean you listen to it." Sable poked the fire with a stick. Sparks danced upward. "You talk like a preacher." Colt chuckled dryly. "Used to talk like a killer. This is an improvement." She turned to him, face unreadable. "What were you before this?" He stared into the flames. "Soldier. Scout. Gun hand. Pick a label. And now?" He looked up. "Now I'm someone who saw a girl tied to a post and figured the world had gone crazy enough." that pulled a small smile from her. Faint. Almost invisible. But it was there. Colt didn't push further. He'd seen how deep wounds could run, how silence could protect a person from their own past. They settled into the quiet, letting the crackle of fire and the occasional night wind say what words could not. But peace in the desert was never more than a fragile thread. Colt felt it before he heard it, an itch in the spine, the kind you get right before trouble shows its teeth. Then came the distant thudding of hooves. He rose, motioned Sable behind the rocks. She didn't argue. He stepped out into the moonlight, rifle in hand, heart steady. The riders came into view fast, 3 of them, maybe 4, moving like they knew the trail. Not townsfolk. Hired guns by the way they rode and how their coats didn't flap. Guns tied low. Faces wrapped in scarves. Colt ducked low and moved behind a boulder. He waited, counting the footfalls. When the first rider rounded the bend, Colt fired, 1 shot. The lead man toppled from his horse with a grunt, a leg twisted at a strange angle. Chaos followed. 2 more shots cracked in the dark, answering Colt's, wild and high. Sable crouched nearby, hands over her ears, lips moving like she was whispering something not meant for hearing. Colt rolled, fired again, hit one in the shoulder. The third man turned and rode off, taking the last horse with him. The injured one tried to crawl away, but Colt marched over and kicked his rifle away. "Who sent you?" Colt asked. The man cursed. "Preacher wants the girl back. Said she's property of Elmswood now. Said you'd run." "Wrong again," Colt said, and drove the butt of the rifle into the side of his head, knocking him cold. When he returned to Sable, she was staring at the fire, still whispering. Her hands trembled. "You all right?" he asked. She looked up slowly. "You shouldn't have to do this. Not for me." Colt lowered himself beside her, wiped blood from his brow with the back of his hand. "Don't say that. You don't owe them anything." "They think I'm cursed," she said. "And sometimes I think they're right." He frowned. "Why?" "When I was small, strange things happened. Fires. Dreams that came true. I'd touch things and feel pain that wasn't mine. People started dying." Colt leaned closer. "And did you make it happen? On purpose?" "No," she whispered. "Then it ain't a curse. Just something the world hasn't found a name for yet." Her eyes brimmed with something close to tears, but she blinked them away before they fell. "You talk like someone who's seen monsters." "I've been one," he said. "And I know what real evil looks like. It doesn't live in girls trying to survive." They sat in silence again, this time longer, deeper. The fire faded to coals and the stars began to shift toward dawn. Sable finally lay down, her head on her arm, eyes fluttering shut. Colt stayed awake, rifle across his knees, watching the horizon. As the first light began to silver the rocks, he muttered, more to himself than her, "They'll keep coming. The preacher won't stop. Not until he gets what he wants." Sable stirred, half asleep. "Then we keep riding." Colt looked at her. Something had changed. Not in her power. Not in her silence. But in her will. The girl who had been tied to a post now spoke like someone ready to stand. He nodded. And as the sun crested the ridge, bathing the canyon in gold, the 2 of them packed up in silence. Together they rode eastward into the rising day, not toward safety but toward whatever waited next, sorrow, fire, or something more. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The bond between them, fragile and new, was enough, for now. The heat came early that morning. By noon, it pressed down like a judgment, the kind that made men confess sins they hadn't committed just to cool their conscience. Colt and Sable rode in silence through the bone-colored canyon, the horse weary beneath them, the red dust clinging to their clothes and skin like guilt. Sable hadn't said more than a handful of words since dawn. She stared ahead with her chin raised, eyes scanning the rocks like she expected them to reach out and grab her. She wasn't scared, not exactly. But something inside her was tightening, coiling, preparing for a blow she couldn't name. Colt noticed. He didn't ask. He just guided the horse through narrow passes and jagged turns, occasionally glancing behind them for signs of pursuit. Tracks vanished quickly in terrain like this, but gut feelings lingered. His gut told him trouble hadn't given up. By late afternoon, they found a dried-up stream bed shaded by cottonwoods. The horse drank what little water trickled through a crevice. Sable dismounted without help, stretching her sore legs, trying not to wince. Colt handed her a piece of jerky. "You eat." "Some," she replied, voice low. "You need more than some, if you want to stay ahead of what's coming." She took the jerky but didn't eat. Instead, she sat with her back to a rock and pulled her knees up. He knew that posture. Not just fatigue. That was someone shielding herself from memory. Tell me what happened, he said quietly, not demanding, just offering space. Sable's fingers tightened around the strip of meat. She didn't look at him. I was 6. We lived near the pines, east of Silver Butte. My mother was a healer. Herbs, charms, whispers to the wind. People came to her when the doctor couldn't help. She taught you? Some. Her voice shook. I remember the colors. The smells. Smoke from crushed juniper. And her singing. Colt listened, motionless. Then a boy fell sick, she went on. High fever. He screamed all night. My mother gave him bark tea and put her hands on his chest. He slept after that. Next morning he was walking again. That sounds like a miracle, not a crime. It was, until the preacher's wife found a bone charm under the boy's pillow. Called it witchcraft. Said my mother consorted with spirits. Colt exhaled through his nose, slow. And they came for her. They came with rope and fire. I hid. I saw it all through a crack in the wall. Her face. Her screams. Sable swallowed. When it was over, I ran. I ran until I didn't know my name anymore. Colt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's what they saw in you. Not a curse. A mirror. She looked up. They saw something they couldn't control, he said. And it scared the hell out of them. Sable wiped at her eyes. Sometimes I feel it. That same fire inside me. When I'm angry. Or afraid. I thought maybe it was real. Maybe they were right. No, Colt's voice dropped, almost a growl. What they did was fear wrapped in scripture. Power doesn't make you evil. What you do with it does. She didn't reply, but her shoulders eased slightly. They rested there for an hour before moving on. The sun had begun its descent, casting long, jagged shadows across the canyon walls. Colt led the way now on foot, guiding the horse while Sable rode. She was tired, more than she admitted, but she didn't protest. They were just clearing a narrow gulch when the first shot rang out. It cracked off the rock like thunder, kicking up gravel inches from Colt's boot. He dropped, drew, and fired back in a single motion. Sable ducked low, hands gripping the saddle horn. Ridge. Colt barked, pointing. 3 men, silhouettes against the sky, rifles aimed down. They had been followed. Colt fired again, hitting the rock beside one man's knee. The man flinched but didn't fall. Bullets rained down. Colt pulled the horse into a crevice, motioning Sable to slide off and take cover. She scrambled behind a boulder, hands trembling. Colt crouched beside her, eyes scanning for angles. You all right? She nodded, breathless. We're boxed in. They've got the high ground. Can't fight our way up. What do we do? He looked at her. You said you felt it. The fire. Can you call it now? She stared at him, shocked. You want me to use it? I want you to survive. Sable looked at her hands. The fear in her eyes warred with something deeper. She closed them, breathed in. Then out. Her fingers curled, slow and deliberate. Another shot shattered the rock inches above her head. She flinched and something snapped inside her. She stood up. Colt tried to grab her, but she stepped into the open, arms raised. Her eyes were open now, glowing faintly gold in the fading light. The air shimmered around her. The 3 men hesitated. Wind kicked up suddenly. Dust and heat swirled like a miniature storm. The fire from Colt's earlier match, still smoldering on a twig pile near the base of the gulch, sparked again, this time roaring to life in a ribbon that raced upward like it had found a voice. The nearest gunman shouted, dropping his rifle as flame licked the barrel. Another turned to run, but the wind knocked him flat. Only one remained, frozen, his weapon shaking. Sable lowered her arms slowly. The wind calmed. The fire vanished. The men fled. Colt rose, brushing dust off his coat, stunned. You all right? Sable didn't speak. She turned to him with a look he couldn't quite name, part sorrow, part power, part release. I didn't mean to hurt them, she whispered. You didn't. But I could have. Colt nodded. That's the difference. They gathered their things in silence. The horse, spooked but uninjured, followed without resistance. As twilight settled across the land, the 2 of them moved forward, not fast but together. Later that night, they found shelter in an old Spanish mission, long abandoned and half-collapsed. Ivy strangled its stone archway, and a broken bell hung above the entrance like a forgotten prayer. They made a small fire inside against the crumbling altar. Sable explored a little before sitting beside him. This place, she murmured, brushing dust from a cracked mosaic tile. My mother once came here. She said it was a place of safety. Colt tilted his head. Do you feel safe? Not yet. She looked at him. but I don't feel alone. He smiled faintly. That's a start. She lay back on the stone floor, eyes on the ceiling, stars visible through the broken roof. Colt watched her for a moment, then settled beside her. We can head south. Into Mexico. Leave all this behind. She didn't answer right away. Finally she whispered, I don't want to run anymore. He turned to her. You want to go back? Elmswood needs to see me. Not the tied-up girl. Not the witch. Me. Colt studied her face. There was no anger in her voice, just clarity. Resolve. You sure? No. But I'm done hiding. He nodded. Then we go back. The fire crackled between them, soft and steady. In the ruins of a church that once offered sanctuary, two broken souls found something close to purpose. And outside, beyond the mountains, the preacher's wrath gathered like a storm. You said. They reached Elmswood at dawn. The town looked smaller than Sable remembered, meaner too. Not in size but in spirit. The buildings sagged under the weight of dust and sin, the streets littered with silence. Doors were bolted. Curtains shifted. People watched but didn't step outside. It was the kind of quiet that screamed. Colt rode in beside her, his horse weary, his eyes scanning for movement. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His rifle rested across his lap, and the tension in his shoulders told her everything she needed to know. This was it. The end of the trail. One way or another. They stopped near the gallows. A rope already hung from the beam. Fresh. Taut. Prepared. Colt swung down first, then helped Sable dismount. She stepped forward alone, boots crunching the brittle dirt beneath her. Her dress, stained and torn, fluttered in the wind. Her hair hung wild over her shoulders. She looked like something half out of a dream, half out of a nightmare. But she didn't look afraid. The church bell rang once. The preacher stepped out moments later, flanked by two of the sheriff's men and a crowd of townsfolk. His robe was spotless white, but his face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and righteous fire. In one hand he held a worn Bible. In the other, a pistol. He took one look at Sable and sneered. You come to surrender? No, she said, voice even. I came to speak. The preacher barked a humorless laugh. The devil speaks now? Colt stepped forward. She's not the one holding the gun. The preacher didn't flinch. You'll regret returning here, boy. Colt didn't respond. He moved behind Sable like a wall, his presence solid and calm. He didn't touch her, didn't direct her. Just stood there quiet and ready. Sable raised her chin and looked at the crowd. She saw the faces, some she recognized, some she didn't. A woman who once sold her apples. A man who spit at her feet. Children watching from behind their mother's skirts. The sheriff stood in the back, eyes downcast, his badge gleaming like a guilty conscience. I'm not here to curse you, she said. And I'm not here to beg. The crowd shifted. I was tied to a post, she continued, called names I never earned. Blamed for fires I didn't light, for deaths I didn't cause. You hated me not because I harmed you, but because I reminded you of something you couldn't explain. The preacher stepped forward, voice booming. She confesses. Hear that? She admits the power, unclean, wicked. I never said wicked, Sable replied. You did. You always did. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. The air felt charged, not with magic, but with truth. My mother was a healer. She saved lives. And you burned her. You called her a witch because she didn't look like you, didn't pray like you, didn't kneel when told. And when I ran with her songs in my mouth and fire at my heels. That fire didn't come from me. It came from your fear. The wind stirred. Dust lifted in little swirls at her feet. The people didn't move, but they were listening now. Really listening. Sable stepped closer to the gallows, to the preacher. You can kill me. Tie me up again. But it won't change the truth. I'm not cursed. I'm not possessed. I am simply not afraid of you anymore. The preacher's hand trembled. His finger slid over the trigger. You think this makes you brave? He hissed. You come here with your snake tongue and your tricks, poisoning honest minds? I came here with nothing but truth, she said. And then he raised the gun. The sound of the hammer cocking rang out like a crack of ice. Colt moved, but he was too far. The sheriff reached, but too slow. The preacher fired. The bullet stopped midair. It hung between them, suspended, quivering like a leaf caught in an invisible storm. Gasps broke through the crowd. Children screamed. One woman dropped to her knees. Sable stood motionless, her hand slightly raised. Her eyes were glowing, not wild, not blazing, but soft. Like candlelight in a chapel. She lowered her hand. The bullet dropped to the ground with a dull plink. The preacher backed away. No, no. Your words built this, she said softly. Your fear. Your fire. I didn't come to destroy you. But you already destroyed yourself. He turned to run. Flames erupted, not from her, not from magic, but from the torch he had left burning too close to the gallows post. The wind caught it. The wood ignited. In moments, the fire spread to his robe. He screamed, flailing, falling to the ground as smoke poured upward like some final sermon to the sky. Colt reached her side as the crowd moved in chaos, some running, some frozen. The preacher writhed, but no one went to help. It was over in minutes. The flames died. The smoke cleared. The preacher lay still. Sable turned to the crowd, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like she'd just outrun death. She didn't speak again. She didn't have to. Someone stepped forward. An older woman. Gray hair. Soft hands. She approached Sable slowly, then lowered herself to her knees. Then another. And another. They didn't speak, didn't ask for forgiveness. They just knelt. Not to worship. Not to beg. But in recognition. Of survival. Of truth. Of a girl they'd nearly burned who chose to come back not with vengeance, but with voice. The sheriff stepped up to Colt, uncertain. What do we do now? Colt looked past him, toward the horizon. Start over. Maybe listen this time. Sable stared at the gallows, now blackened and broken. Tear it down, she said. And they did. That night the sky cleared. The stars returned. Sable sat outside the sheriff's old cabin, watching the town from a hilltop. Fires burned in the hearths again, but not the kind meant to punish. Just warmth. Just light. Colt joined her, sitting in the dirt beside her, rifle laid across his knees. They'll talk about you, he said after a while. I know. Some won't believe. Doesn't matter. They'll call you a legend. She smiled faintly. Let them. Every legend starts with a girl nobody believed. Colt looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. You still think you're cursed? No, she whispered. I think I'm finally free. Below them, Elmswood breathed again. No cheers. No celebration. But something real had begun to shift. Slowly. Like the land after rain. Sable leaned her head on Colt's shoulder. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to close her eyes. And from the shadows beyond the town, the wind moved gently across the plains, no longer warning, no longer wailing, but whispering something old and true. They called her witch girl once. But now they would remember her differently.